Hello and welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. If you like this show, go over to believe.com, BLEAV, and support the other shows there. My name is Tyler, and today, man, we are going to have a rough episode for our Baltimore Orioles. They get swept over the weekend by the Detroit Tigers. As is usual with my episodes, I'm really not going to dig into these games too much. You know, on a good day, getting too much into the minute by minute of baseball can be a bit much. But when the team's losing, it's even more brutal. And I don't even know that it's helpful in this context. The Orioles right now are just playing like a pitiful baseball team. And we've talked about this a lot this season is the pitching staff, the starting pitching staff in particular, because the bullpen's been pretty good. The starters are just the problem. There's lack of upside. There isn't even the floor that we thought we were going to have, and the depth that we were assumed to have built over the winter is totally gone. All that's legitimate. All that is fair, but you can't throw everything at the starting staff because the offense right now is not exactly holding up their end of the bargain either. This was a team that was supposed to be an elite offensive group with a mediocre to slightly below average starting staff and a deep bullpen that could, I think that the goal was to tread water until the trade deadline, until Kyle Bradish was back, and then hopefully go on a run in the second half to kind of, take a shot at the AL East title, certainly, make a playoff spot. And right now, none of that is happening. And, it's just not panning out. So I think what I'm going to do for today's episode is try to spin that on its head a little bit. And instead of doubling down on the negativity, because there's certainly room for that, and they deserve every bit of negativity you can throw at them right now. What I'd like to do is if you go over to camdenchat.com and read my blog for the day, or for the week rather, you'll get a taste of this, but is to try to find some nuggets of positivity, and not even like positivity, but reasons to believe that this team can turn it around. Because right now, as the Orioles stand, they are, forget about a World Series run. These guys aren't even going to win. They're not even going to have a 500 winning percentage. They're going to be a sub 500 team. And it's the season is just going down the tube. So I think what I'm going to try to do here is take a step back, look at some things that have happened this year, and think about what the Orioles could potentially do to turn things around here. So as I mentioned at the start, if you head over to camdenchat.com, you'll find my blog, my commentary for the week, which is titled, "Is There Any Reason for Optimism with the Orioles?" And I try to lay out what I just did, which is to say that there's really no slicing and dicing this season to say that, the Orioles should have a better record than they do. Their performance has not dictated that. They have been horrific starting pitching wise. And the offense has been, I think on the whole mediocre, but in terms of day-to-day performance, I think the offense has been a humongous disappointment as well. I mean, if you look at like what the stats they've put up, I think they fall in the middle of the pack in a lot of ways, but that a lot of that is scoring a bunch one day and then scoring nothing for 3 games, scoring like 3 or fewer runs 3 games in a row. It's not a viable day-to-day offense. And I think, you could look at that a couple different ways and say, man, the offense has actually been even more disappointing than the pitching because we sort of had low expectations for the starting staff, especially with Rodriguez down. But, the pitching staff is what it is. Whereas the lineup doesn't have the injury excuses. They don't have oh, we lost this huge piece and didn't replace him. Like, yeah, they lost Anthony Santander in the lineup. They replaced him with Tyler O'Neill, which I think, you look at year-to-year performance, age, all that stuff. You could reasonably say O'Neill maybe won't be quite what Santander was. Certainly not the clubhouse type of influence, just a guy that's been here a long time. But in terms of on-field production, I think he felt maybe Tyler O'Neill could fill that void, and that hasn't really happened. But I don't think Santander's done so much with the Blue Jays that you have to feel terrible about that. But the lineup is mostly what's back from last year, which again, on the season was decent last year, but the second half was an absolute disaster. And what we're kind of seeing now is a continuation of that second half slump. And day to day, it's just not a viable bunch. So all that to say, things have been bad for the Orioles. There's no reason to say they should be better than what they have been, but I think there's a few elements you can look at and say, all right, well, these things have gone well, or these things, I have a reasonable expectation for these things to get better. And based on that, we can sort of have some sort of optimism for the Baltimore Orioles in 2025 because this team is just, given where they are in their window, this team should be too talented to sort of just give up on things at this point. It shouldn't be this abhorrent, 1 month into the season. So let's go through those things point by point. So the number one reason that I am somewhat optimistic about the Baltimore Orioles are the pair of Cedric Mullins and Ryan O'Hearn. So I think if you go back to before the season, there were some simulations run, especially Pacoda, that had the Orioles as, yes, worse than last year. I think Pacoda had the Orioles at 87 wins coming into the season when they won, 91 last year. But you lose Corbin Burns, you don't really replace him. Losing 4 more games feels about right there. But even in those simulations, I think you probably would have looked at Cedric Mullins or Ryan O'Hearn as productive members of the roster, but not exactly spearheads of the offense. Not exactly, all-star contenders. That was going to be Rutschman, Henderson, Westberg. Maybe Holiday takes a leap forward. Maybe Tyler O'Neill comes in as a free agent and, has the chance to really springboard himself towards a massive contract because he could opt out after this season. And those would be the guys kind of leading the way. And then Mullins, O'Hearn, more as role players, would contribute in the ways that they could. Well, so far they are the Orioles offense. Mullins in particular, he leads the team in all of these categories: hits, doubles, home runs, walks, stolen bases, RBI, on base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. I think the only stat he doesn't really lead in is batting average, and he's like second on that. And he might be the first in terms of qualified hitters, guys that have had enough at bats to kind of qualify for these season titles. But all around, he is the Orioles' best player right now. I mean, unquestioned. And good for Cedric Mullins. I mean, he is a free agent after the season. I think last week or the week before, there was talk about how he would love to stay here. Very similar to the Austin Hayes conversations and quotes last year, where with Hayes, it never really seemed viable. Hayes, gets hurt a lot, was very streaky. Mullins, has more of a track record of that 30-30 season when the Orioles weren't so good, has been a continued contributor on this team. Not always as much on the offensive side, been more about a league average hitter while providing really good defense and good base running. But this season, he's kind of gone back to that 30-30 type season in a walk year for him. And, really good on him because I don't know where this team would be offensively if he wasn't at least, doing this. I mean, he's playing out of his mind right now, and the Orioles need it for the offense to have any semblance of legitimacy. And a lot of nights you'll see a ludicrous box score of like 4 hits, two runs on 4 or 5 hits, 3 walks, 10 strikeouts. And you'll look and Mullins has a double or, a single, a stolen base, and a walk. And he's like the only guy doing anything. He's getting into scoring position to then be stranded there. Or, he's coming through with the base hit to knock in the 1 run the Orioles score on the night. Or he's the one to hit the 3-run homer and give the Orioles a chance to win a game. It just, so many nights, it is Cedric Mullins and a bunch of black holes around him. Now, the only caveat there really is Ryan O'Hearn. O'Hearn is doing a really nice job himself. He obviously doesn't start quite as much as Mullins does. He sits a lot of the time against left-handed pitching. He shares first base with Ryan Mountcastle. And therefore, the counting stats, he's not really in the same realm as Mullins. And, he's not going to steal bases. He's not going to he's not going to hit the doubles, I guess, that Mullins does. But in terms of the rate stats, he's kind of right in the conversation. He's batting 303 with a 378 on base and a 530 slugging. Just really good numbers there. And I think, and if you look at O'Hearn's baseball savant, I mean, it's a thing of beauty. It is all red. I mean, not that that's always, that's a very simplified way of looking at a baseball savant and analyzing a player. But in general, red is good on baseball savant. It's, depending on where it is, it means you're hitting the ball hard. You're not chasing. You're not striking out. All your expected stats, which are based on those peripheral stats of, hitting the ball hard and not striking out and walking a decent amount. I mean, he grades out great in that regard, even better than Mullins does, who himself has a pretty good baseball savant, especially for him historically. He's never been a guy that has hit the ball crazy hard. He hasn't always been the most walk happy person. He'll strike out a little bit much. Mullins is not. He's doing all those things to the best of his ability this year. He's not chasing. He's among the league leaders in walks. It's just like these are two guys that have really reinvented themselves. And the reason I'm optimistic about it is if you look at, those peripheral stats I was talking about, which is hitting the ball hard, not chasing, not striking out, those are the results. So their outputs are equal to their inputs. Their O'Hearn's batting average on balls in play is 302, which is right around what you would expect it to be. For Cedric Mullins, his batting average on balls in play is 305, which makes a lot of sense. His career batting average on balls in play is 290, so a bit up from that, but he's running faster than before. He's putting balls in play harder than before. You'd expect better batting average on balls you hit hard. So it's all like making sense. And I think a player to put in the honorable mention with these two is Ramon Urias because his numbers are good too. He's batting 317 with a 386 on base and a 400 slugging percentage. So those numbers aren't quite as dramatic. WRC plus of 133, which would be a career high for him. I think you worry about Urias regressing a little bit because his batting average on balls in play is 360, which is pretty elevated. You wouldn't actually expect him to get quite to that degree based on how hard he's hitting the ball. And again, if you look at his baseball savant, a lot more blue there. He's hitting the ball not quite as hard. He is walking at a good rate, not striking out much, which is awesome. But because he doesn't hit the ball super hard, you don't have those big slugging percentages that you would expect or you would hope for. He doesn't have huge expected batting average because again he's not hitting the ball super hard. So some of those elements with Urias you expect him to regress a little bit, but we talk about Urias because he's just a ball player, man. He competes every time he plays with consistent chances. He produces. He's a career 110 WRC plus. Ramon Urias is a career 10% better than league average baseball player or hitter. Has a Gold Glove in his back pocket, can play multiple positions. Ramon Urias deserves to play a lot more than the Orioles give him the chance to, and that's, the result of the prospects they brought up with the higher ceilings. But, I think in this moment, you can't really take that for granted. And that kind of, rolls into another point I have, which is they need to be playing their best players right now. And that doesn't mean your most talented players. That doesn't mean the guys with the highest ceilings. That means the guys that right now are going to give you the best chance to win a baseball game. And maybe that means O'Hearn plays first base and Mountcastle sits down. Maybe that means Ramon Urias plays third base and Jordan Westbrook sits down. And that means Cedric Mullins plays every day, even against left-handed pitching, and he plays center field and he hits leadoff because he is your best player right now. You get him as many out at bats as possible, and it's not like he's a detriment in the field or on the bases. You put Mullins in there every day. I know he was ill over the weekend, so he didn't play on Sunday against Tarek Skubal, who's a really good left-handed hitter, left-handed pitcher. And, Mullins has his history against left-handed starters struggling, and you don't want him, you got to get guys off their feet. But as far as platooning first base, as far as giving Urias his spots, I think that kind of needs to get shelved for the time being because the Orioles need to score in any way possible. And yeah, we're waiting for Westbrook to break out of it. We're waiting for Mountcastle to turn his hard hit balls into home runs. I get all that, but the Orioles need to win baseball games right now. They are out of wiggle room. They need to play very good baseball for the next 5 months if they have any chance of making the playoffs, and that means getting these guys in the lineup as many times as possible. So that's what I have to say on that piece of it. Moving down the line, the starting pitching. Okay, the starting pitching is horrific. I mean, like I'm not going to make some case for why Charlie Morton is actually a good pitcher. I'm not going to say Dean Kramer, he got through 5 innings on Sunday and didn't look totally catastrophic because then he went up for the 6th inning and imploded a little bit. But I think there are signs that things have we've gotten through the worst of it. I think things are going to start to get a little better in May. And the reason for that is, first of all, I think 3 spots in the rotation are okay or going to be okay. So one, Tomoyuki Sagano has been fine. His peripherals are scary as anything. He gets hit hard. He doesn't strike out. He doesn't miss guys, bats. But through 5 games, he's yet to allow more than 3 runs, and you take that. And in his last 2 starts, he's thrown 7 innings each. Now he pitches against the Yankees this week. I think that might get ugly, but for 5 starts, not allowing more than 3 runs in any one start on this staff, that's ace type stuff for what the Orioles have at their disposal. I think that's great. Cade Povich, I came into the season as a Povich guy. He has his ups and downs. He is clearly still figuring things out a little bit. That start against the Nationals was very good. He should have gotten through 7 innings if it wasn't for a Gunnar Henderson error to kind of get him the boot there in the 7th with Brandon Hyde wanting him to still be in line for a win. and his FIP on the season is down to 4.37. And I think it's undoubtable that, you can't, I don't even know the word I'm trying to say. It is without a doubt that when he is on, right now, of the five that the Orioles start on a regular basis, Cade Povich is clearly the most talented. He can miss bats, he can strike guys out. His issue is walks. If he doesn't walk guys, he's usually pretty good because yes, he'll give up contact, but then he's not, giving up the free passes. It's really just for him, be aggressive, man. Your stuff is good enough to play in the zone, throw the ball in the zone, make guys earn their way on base, and when you do that, you can be a productive pitcher. Again, I don't think he looks like a future stud, but Cade Povich to me looks like a guy that you are going to put in the back of your rotation for a long time to come, and he can compete. He just has to get the walks under control. And again, a FIP of 4.37, not great, but solid enough to be a back end starter, especially if you can go 5 and 6 innings with continued success every time out. Povich, I've been impressed by, and I think three of his last four starts were at least decent. I think he had was it the one against Cincinnati? He was pretty rough, but besides that, has been decent. And again, on this staff, he's one of the better pitchers. And then Kyle Gibson, it sounds like he's going to start this week against the Yankees. Kyle Gibson is not some savior, but if anything, he is consistent. He will go out there, he'll make the starts, he will get you through 5 innings, and he'll hand the ball over to the bullpen with at least a chance to win the game most of the time. Maybe he gives up 3 runs, 4 runs. You're not going to love it, but compared to like the starts from Morton, compared to the starts from Kramer, Brandon Young hasn't looked fantastic in my opinion. Kyle Gibson gives you an upgrade on those guys. So Sugano, Povich, Gibson, you're not going to mistake these guys for the 1971 Orioles, but they can get outs, and that's what the Orioles need right now. And on top of that, they are getting healthier. Zach Eflin is throwing bullpens. Sounds like he's progressing well. He'll be back in early May. Trevor Rogers is actively rehabbing. I think he was with Chesapeake last week. He threw 3 innings and a good amount of pitches. So I think Rogers is going to be back here in 2 weeks or so. He could take a whole month. You can have a whole month for a rehab stint. I don't think he's going to take that long. Chase McDermott is facing live hitters down in Sarasota. Grayson Rodriguez had the second opinion on the shoulder. Doesn't sound like it's a season ender. There's still no return date for him, so it's not ideal, but better than I was anticipating. And Kyle Bradish showed, I don't know if it was on his Instagram or the team's Instagram, I can't remember, but he's throwing bullpens. He is throwing bullpens, which I think for a guy that had Tommy John less than a year ago is a pretty good sign. Obviously, they're going to slow play with things with him. I'm sure he's not throwing 93 miles an hour yet, but it seems like he's in a good spot to be back early in the second half, is if I would guess. Um, and that's the point. The Orioles they need to tread water right now. I don't think the Orioles expect to go on a run, but they need to tread water until some of these guys get healthy, and then they can kind of maybe start to go on that run they need. And it feels like in May when they're going to likely get Eflin and Rogers back. Hopefully, Povich, Sagano, and Gibson can hold things down a little bit. McDermott, who, some scouts really like McDermott, that if he's healthy, potentially he's a nice mid rotation type of piece this year too. If they can get all Eflin, Rogers, and McDermott back in the mix in May, then you do feel like they can tread water a little bit until July. That's a long way to go from May to July, especially in this season, but that gets you closer to sort of that depth you were talking about in the offseason to be, slightly competent in the rotation to then maybe get your lineup to get their act together. So that's a positive there. Then in terms of timing, right now the Orioles do have time on their side, and they also have what is, in my opinion, a mediocre American League on their side. So I did the math on this a little bit. The Orioles have 135 games left. In order for them to get to 86 wins on the season, which is the number that the Royals and Tigers had last year to get the fifth and sixth spots in the playoffs. I think is there 6 spots now? Yeah, 6 spots. Whatever. To get the final spots in the playoffs last year was 86 wins. So the Orioles would need to win 56.3% of their remaining games. Now, if you extrapolate that over an entire season, that's a 91 win pace for the season, which is the exact number of wins the Orioles had last year. So that's not like some insane number. 91 wins is a wild card team. The Orioles, I think, coming into the season felt kind of like a wild card team. They didn't necessarily feel better than the Yankees on paper. It was close, but I think a lot of people would have given the Yankees an edge. And here they are in a spot where they need to play like the team they were supposed to be coming into the season, and they can theoretically make the playoffs. Now, it's also possible the bar to make the playoffs isn't quite as high as it was last year. And this can cut two ways, so I'll break that down. So last year, or I'm sorry, there's only six teams in the AL that currently have positive run differentials. They've scored more runs than their opponents. Last year, there were nine teams that ended the season in the AL with positive run differentials. So it seems pretty clear that the AL is not as good this year as it was last year, and it's certainly not as good as the NL. Now, the way that cuts against the Orioles is there's more, there's fewer haves and more have-nots, and the haves can bully the have-nots and score more runs. That makes the bar to get the make the playoffs higher because theoretically, like the White Sox look even worse this year than they did last year. They could beat up on those teams really badly, and that makes their win totals climb. Where the worst teams have even fewer wins. So, if the whatever, what did the White Sox win last year? Something like 45 games or something. They could win 40 games this year, and that gives, each of the teams that made the playoffs one extra win or something like that. That's obviously not good for the Orioles' chances, but the Orioles have the same chance to beat up on the have-nots. Now, right now, the Orioles are one of the have-nots, so you've got to turn that on its head a little bit. But if the Orioles can beat up on these bad teams, they can maybe get onto the positive side of things there. Then they've got a shot there. And also, again, it's May, or it's not even May yet. They've got 135 games. The Orioles can get back into this thing. They've got 5 months to do it. They will theoretically get healthier, and you'd have to think the performances, especially on the offensive side, because I've been disappointed there, will get better. Um, so and the other thing I want to say is that last year the New York Mets were 11 games under 500 in late May, and they rebounded in arguably a better league, the NL, to not only make the playoffs but also get all the way to the NLCS. Are the Orioles this year better than the Mets last year? I don't think it's like terribly different. These are the Mets without Juan Soto. The pitching staff was a bit of a cobbled together collage of okay arms that figured it all out. I don't think the Orioles are totally different. And, I would say this year the Orioles might be in a more winnable situation than the Mets were last year, and the Mets pulled it together. And then finally, I think, and this is the most likely route for the Orioles to turn things around, is that these homegrown hitters start producing. you know, People talk about playing to your baseball card, which is, you look at the back of a player's baseball card, you see the stats they've put up historically, and you expect guys to most years play to about that level, maybe a little better, maybe a little bit worse, but not off by miles. And that's really what the Orioles need. Now, the issue is the Orioles don't have a ton of guys with lengthy histories that you can count on. Obviously, Gunnar was an MVP candidate last year. Adley was the best hitting catcher until, the last, I don't know, 8 months, whatever, July of last year. Jordan Westburg was an all-star, then he got hurt. Jackson Holliday, top prospect in baseball, hasn't really performed up to his level yet as a professional or as a major leaguer. It's not these aren't, 5-year veterans that you necessarily can say, oh yeah, that guy's been to the All-Star game three times, he's won a Gold Glove, like this is who he is. No, these are younger guys that are still kind of figuring it out a little bit. But I think if the Orioles believe their process enough, that these are guys you expect to kind of carry the load. I mean, that's what this team was built on. The philosophy is that young, talented, cost-effective hitters can sort of elevate your roster. They can paper over built-in flaws on the pitching side of things, and that kind of worked last year. The offense was really good. The pitching staff was sort of okay, and the Orioles won 91 games, but it has not happened this year. And the only hope really the only, all these things I've talked about up to this point is sort of ancillary things. These are things that are helpful. It's Mullins and O'Hearn. Again, they were supposed to be role players. Them playing at this level is a positive. You're getting more out of them than you would expect. And there's a lot of reasons to think they should continue to play that well. The pitching is getting less horrible and more healthy. That's great. I think you count on that too. You built in these depth to kind of tread water. I think this pitching staff is built to tread water to give your offense a chance to win. And there are signs they are able to do that now. If they can get through 5 and 6 innings and allowing 3 runs, that's sort of what you hope for there, to be sort of a 4.5 ERA type of rotation and give your pitching staff the chance to score 5 and 6 runs and win games. That's great. And then time being on your side. There's ups and downs to a season. You're going to have good months and bad months. Not really necessarily as bad a month as the Orioles have had in April, but in general, You're gonna have good months and bad months. Even the best teams in the league have, 500 months. You have to have more good months than bad months, and the Orioles have 5 months to figure it out. That's great. And the American League really is who we thought they were. There are not very many good teams in the AL, and the Orioles should take advantage of that. Will they? We don't know. But ultimately, it's all really just setting the stage for the offense to be what the Orioles need the offense to be, which is to say one of the top five offenses in baseball. They have the tools there to do it. Can they do it? So far, the answer is no. But the talent hasn't dissipated from these guys out of nowhere. They need to stop striking out so much. They need to put the ball in play. They need not be relying on the home run every single game to score runs, which is the issue right now. If they don't hit home runs, the Royals aren't scoring runs. Essentially, they're getting guys on base. Even against Skubal on Sunday, Mateo, who's a tertiary player theoretically on this roster, gets on base twice, steals a base, gets himself into scoring position. The Orioles had chances on Sunday. They went 0 for 9 with runners in scoring position. You can't do that. You need to be getting one or two or three hits in with guys on in those situations to score 1 and 2 and 3 runs and give your team a chance to win the baseball game. You can't be relying on the home run or bust every single day. And I think right now that's an issue with the Orioles. So that's what I have to say on the Orioles this year. I apologize for kind of running through all that pretty fast. I had a toddler climbing on me midway through that you may have heard. I had to stop and start a couple of times. But, the main point here is the Orioles aren't dead yet. They've played like absolute garbage to this point. There's no getting around that. But the reasons that the team was thought of as a contender coming into the season still exist. Yes, the pitching staff stinks, but the pitching staff was never going to be the reason they were going to win baseball games. The offense was, and that hasn't happened yet. The offense hasn't really shown up yet. If and when the offense shows up to the party, that is a game changer. And I think that it's still possible that happens. And in the meantime, the pitching staff, in my eyes, is getting more competent week to week. I know the numbers are bad. I know, but they're getting healthier. They need Eflin. I think Gibson is going to help. They need a Rogers. As bad as Rogers was last year, he can at least get them through 5 innings, I think. Morton probably needs to be done or go on the IL and figure something out. Povich is doing what I sort of hoped. He's sort of turning a corner in my eyes. And Sagano has been, I think, a pleasant presence on this roster. He's not going to wow you, but is turning in 6 and 7 innings every time out, and that's pretty super valuable. So I think the pieces are still there for the Orioles to make something happen. If they do or not, though, it's ultimately just on the offense. It needs to figure it out. It needs to be more productive than it's been. It needs to be more consistent than it's been. And nothing the Orioles do from the front office's perspective can change that. They're not going to sign some guy that's going to make Gunnar Henderson hit the ball out of the ballpark or stop striking out so much. There's nobody that's going to tell you're going to bring in and make Adley Rutschman a 20% above league average hitter as he was prior to the second half of last year. The guys just need to figure it out. And that's on the coaching staff to help them recognize flaws in their game. That's on the front office to present, information to the clubhouse that can be helpful in that regard. And that's really all you can do. You can't rebuild a roster midseason. And that's not what this team was designed to be. It wasn't designed to need an overhaul. It needs, one or two players to go on a run, but none of that's going to matter if the offense doesn't figure it out. So that's all I've got for this episode. Jesse or Eli is going to be back midweek to recap the Yankee series and maybe talk about some news items at that point. If you guys like what you listen to here, again, go over to Believe.com. That's BLEAV.com. Support us there. You can also find other shows, including other shows about the Orioles and other sports you care about. Head over to YouTube.com and subscribe to us there. It's absolutely free. Just search the Warehouse Podcast. We should be the first result there. I think we've got about 300 subscribers now, which we really appreciate. If you're listening to this in audio form, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be, make sure you subscribe and give us a positive review there. It helps us reach more people. And on social media, you can find us at the Warehouse Pod on Blue Sky and Twitter. And finally, if you like to email the show, we are thewarehousepod@gmail.com. If you send us a nice note or ask a question, we will answer it on the show. But that is all I've got for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Tyler. This has been the Warehouse Podcast, and we will talk to you later. See ya.